Are you having customers purchase your product but quickly abandon using it? How can you tell if your customers truly love your solution or just feel, eh? In this episode, we're going to explore how developing a product that delivers 10 times value can help you overcome these challenges and a whole lot more. I'm Stephen White, and this is Building Lean. Hey there, awesome founders. Welcome back once again to Building Lean, our series of workshops that cover the steps and activities your startup must take to build key business functions to sustainably generate revenues. Not only are our workshops inspired by thought leaders on startup and scale methodologies, but we also share our experience as founders as well as working with hundreds of startups and our research distilling the reasons why over 160 funded startups failed. And that's not all. Once again, we have Shafiq patiently waiting to join us immediately after this workshop is over to answer your burning startup questions related to how you can build your startup lean. If you're interested in growing your startup by building lean, please subscribe to this YouTube channel and click the notification bell nearby so you can receive the latest insights that will help you avoid mistakes that cost you time and money. Now, briefly, during our last episode, I just want to recap this because we explored your assumption related to your product's pricing. Since your product's price is a function of the value your product delivers to your customer, you need to develop, test, and implement a sales funnel that addresses each stage of the buyer's journey. This would answer each question a potential customer would have related to why your product is better than existing alternatives and how your product solves your customer's problem, which is so important. Because without the ability to efficiently convert qualified leads into paying customers, you won't be able to get into the virtuous cycle of rapidly improving your product, which leads us directly into the focus for this episode. As I'm going to discuss what comprises your product assumption by introducing the user's product adoption journey and the 4 product design phases. Now, as a founder, your focus needs to be on developing a product or service that delivers 10 times the value over existing alternatives, as this will directly lead to achieving high rates of product adoption, which in turn enables you to lower your marketing and sales costs. By the way, all of this enables you to avoid or overcome the 4th fatal flaw related to developing a product idea that is easily copied. Now, all this sounds like a wonderful thing to achieve, right? It probably also sounds kind of difficult to just magically develop a product or service so substantially better than your competitors, right? Yeah. It does, which is why I'm going to discuss what you need to accomplish during each startup phase, like you're climbing a ladder, so as to help you accomplish that 10x value delivery advantage that your startup needs. So let's start by briefly understanding the approach many founders errantly make when building their products. To start with, founders often let their desire to hatch the perfect, complete product, something that everyone just loves immediately. They let that drive their product development plans. Unfortunately, this means that they lose focus on delivering customer value because they get distracted by worrying about how they'll make something perfect and pretty that doesn't actually solve their customer's problem. And that distraction causes a startup team to introduce unnecessary complexity through feature creep. Look, many founders, both experienced and newbies, are guilty of this. I have been as well. The reason why this happens though, and the reason why it happens so frequently, is that startup teams know how to use their own product because they're the one developing it, and they forget what it's like to be a customer experiencing a new product for the very first time. In effect, they can't see the forest for the trees. So, how can you avoid those common mistakes that so many startups make, which unfortunately often result in product failures? Well, there are 3 steps you can take, and these steps align with each common mistake. So let's get at it. Number 1, iterate. Instead of trying to hatch a perfect product, you work iteratively to deliver on the value that you promised your customer during the sales process. Number 2, delivering value. See, during the sales cycle, your customer chose to purchase your product based on the value your solution promised to deliver. That means you need to make sure that you are first delivering on that value. In other words, If your product promised time saving, then you need to make sure your solution can solve the problem that the customer wants solved. You can do it faster than existing alternatives. Say, for example, if your product promised dollar savings, monetary savings, then you need to make sure you can produce and deliver your solution for a cost considerably under the selling price so you can keep your pricing down and save your customer money. Or maybe even save them money in terms of how they go about solving their problem today. If your product promised a better quality in terms of durability, higher quality materials, or better style, or even for that matter, that it was easier to use, then you must make sure your solution clearly delivers on the quality promise as well. Number 3, you need to avoid complexity. In the building lean methodology, features are driven by solving the identified problem while delivering on the value. Your features and product capabilities do not stand alone on their own. So let's take a moment and look at a couple of examples of products that delivered on the promised value as founders avoid the common product development mistakes. So to begin with, how can you set up a rapid iteration cycle before you have to commit large capital dollars? This is something that founders always worry about. How about we find the answer by examining a distinctly non-technology based industry? Restaurants. See, opening a new restaurant is an extremely expensive endeavor, with one location easily costing $1 million after complete build out. When you factor in working capital and other startup costs, most restaurant owners have a lot at stake before they serve their customer their first meal. So, what's the answer when it comes to proving out whether your restaurant concept is a hit or not? The food truck. What was once the province of construction sites, the once lowly food truck has been elevated in our cultural experience as the cutting edge of cuisine. The reason why this happened, though, is that restaurant entrepreneurs had to come up with an inexpensive approach to quickly innovating on their offering, and a food truck solved this problem at somewhere around 1/3 to 1/10 of the cost, maybe even less. Now, food trucks show up in all shapes and sizes, with the only issue for diners is a matter of knowing where your favorite restaurant on wheels will be located next. Now, of course, some entrepreneurs chose to solve that unpredictable location problem by building their restaurant concepts in shipping containers, again, reducing the cost of build out. Now, what about tech-driven products or services? Well, the advent of subscription-based or SaaS software makes for a perfect example. See, with software, a startup needs to engage users who have adopted their solution to enable rapid iteration cycles. It's the only way to learn and implement those learnings in your product. So what this means is that you must be super focused on finding the core value driver that will get your users to begin with using your solution on a regular basis. Only then will you be able to roll out additional value in rapid succession and continue to monitor user adoption. See, the key to enable rapid iteration is develop a communication plan that describes the new value users have access to and how they can take advantage of it. This communication can occur both when the user returns to use the original product through push messaging, such as email or notifications. Look, as a consumer, you've probably experienced this yourself by getting email updates on products you use, or even opening an app and seeing the latest change log and describing how and even somebody walking you through new product features. By ensuring that your team is releasing new functionality that solves additional real problems for your users, you will ensure that those users will return to use your product and increase the reasons why they will adopt and continue using your solution. By the way, this also raises the bar on competitors. So in order to displace your product, those competitors, they're going to have to match all of the value your product delivers while having to deliver additional value that you don't solve for today. Well, or at least yet. See, if you can sustain the rapid iteration cycle, you can effectively outrun your competition. So as an example, in 2013, Adobe made this move themselves with a mature product suite, tons of products that have been dominant on the market. Took a pretty big risk when it pivoted from selling individual applications such as Illustrator, Photoshop, Premiere. And they did this by dominating the creative software market with these individual applications, and they shifted it to a subscription model. So by pushing regular updates for Adobe's subscription software and then monitoring use of different features, Adobe was able to rapidly improve product stability and identify new product offerings that only enhance the value of an existing user subscription. See, those new products ended up falling into that subscription based on the learning Adobe had by monitoring its current users' use of the products. Pretty fantastic, right? Well, in a similar way, Dropbox, when it started out with a basic concept of allowing its customers to keep and sync their files across multiple devices, something we completely take for granted today. But Dropbox didn't stop there. It quickly added sharing functionality to improve collaboration, which led to naturally to team plans and file markup functionality with its own document capabilities. All of this enabled Dropbox to raise the bar on its competitors, especially in the consumer market. Okay, now that you understand how using an iteration approach can help you rapidly improve your solution, let's explore how the user's product adoption journey will transform your solution into a market-leading product. The user's product adoption journey, which by the way happens to be our first tool to discuss during this episode, is similar to the buyer's journey in that it illustrates the stages a user goes through in order to adopt your product. Your solution must ensure that you're addressing 4 critical questions to ensure your product is adopted and used regularly by your user. Getting a one-time sale and then having your product sit on a shelf, that just won't help you build a thriving, sustainable business. However, by building in measurable points all along the user experience, you'll be able to quickly fix issues with your product and improve adoption. From when the user first encounters your product to daily use, you want to measure the satisfaction level from the user experience. Of course, this is relatively easy to do for software or digital products such as our Adobe example, and it does become harder without the use of some connected technologies. Yet, if that's you and you're developing a product that doesn't have a connected technology, and we're going to touch on one in depth a little bit later, this is where your creativity, your art as a founder can come into play to measure the user experience by getting your users to share how they use your product. So let's take an example as GoPro. GoPro's original camera didn't have wireless connectivity or even an app associated with the physical device. GoPro was able to measure customer satisfaction and observe usage because the company inspired its customers to post their videos online. Also, GoPro is smart enough to sponsor competitions that were a natural fit for the use of their products. Now, other options you can do beyond that can measure the user experience can occur in feedback forums or even message boards. There's a variety of ways you can engage users and observe how they interpret the use of your product. For that matter, another example would be you can create user advisory councils, and that will help you quickly understand the issues faced by your customers so you can fix those issues quickly. Now, when designing your product, you must engineer these measurement points into the overall solution. You have to ensure you can measure the overall user satisfaction with your product. User surveys are essential to fix your product or service to achieve a net promoter score of 50 or above. Now, when you consider your user's adoption journey, you need to also consider the product adoption curve, which is our second tool. Early adopters are willing to tolerate a minimum feature set with some imperfections as long as your product works when solving their compelling problem. The early majority and late majority want a complete solution that's convenient for them to use. As an early stage entrepreneur who's validating your value delivery business assumption, you're focused on serving those early adopters as you'll learn from them, which will prepare you to service the early majority and late majority. You'll use the product adoption curve to track when to implement proposed features based on the needs of each market segment. Which brings us back to a key understanding of how to do product development correctly. See, you must focus on delivering value first. This means you must align your product design objectives with the 4 design phases. Number 1, make it work. This is focused on users who are early adopters and want your product or service to solve their compelling problem while delivering the core value that you promised, which will be either saving them money, saving them time, improving their quality, or providing a complete solution. The second design phase, the second one, is make it easy. Now, in this case, now that you've proven that your solution works when it comes to delivering the core value, you must make it easy for your customer to use and gain value, which will attract the early majority. Number three, the third development design phase is you make it fast. While you've made it easier for your users to experience your solution's core value, you're now reducing the time it takes your solution to deliver that value to your users. Number four, make it pretty. The final phase of product design comes from delighting your users through aesthetic changes to your product or service, which brings in the laggards who have been curiously observing the early majority and late majority as they use your solution. These design phases fit with how your customers feel when using your product. So in general, you want your customers to be delighted when using your product or service. But the question is, what makes them delighted? In other words, do they feel confidently delighted in experiencing your product because it just works? Perhaps your customers feel relief because they know how fast your product delivers value to them. By the way, entrepreneurs often jump right into the fourth design phase because they want their product or service to look beautiful, since, frankly, their solution, it feels like it represents them. So if you ever get tempted by this approach, I want you to familiarize yourself with just a fantastic quote from Reid Hoffman, who is both not only a famed investor, but he's the founder of LinkedIn and he's the author of Blitzscaling. His quote is, "If you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you launched too late." Think about that. See, even established companies like Apple follow the same process. With the original iPhone, it just worked. It just worked as far as delivering the most basic functionality like taking pictures, browsing the web, sending a text, listening to your music, or receiving an email from your mobile device. Remember, the App Store didn't even exist yet, so whatever tools Apple provided you were the only ones that you had because they focused on making their device work. As Apple observed usage, their designers began focusing on making the user interface easier to manage. For example, the UI changes focused on making relevant notifications easier to locate and take action. When it came to making it faster for the user to experience the iPhone's product value, Apple's engineering team worked on numerous solutions to this problem. Whether it was speeding up the time for the camera to take a picture or accelerating the setup process for a new device by leveraging iCloud. All of these approaches came as a result of how the product had already become easier to use. While Apple had a sleek design from the beginning, it was only later that Apple started releasing the iPhone in an array of colors and sizes. Simplicity had been the standard initially when the early iPhones came out, as all of them had the same screen size and the color options were limited to one or maybe two choices. So a simple way to remind yourself about your product's value focus is: first, make it work; second, make it easy; third, make it fast; and lastly, fourth, make it pretty. I really want to dwell on that. So to repeat, make it work, make it easy, make it fast, make it pretty. Now for our third tool, if you're unfamiliar with the Net Promoter Score, which I kind of gave a hint at a little bit earlier, it's a simple rating system that every product or service should use to measure their customer satisfaction due to its clarity of results and ease of application. Given that it's essential to know if your product is going to be widely adopted in your market segment, the Net Promoter Score can be easily calculated by measuring the rating of your product directly from your customers. So let me tell you how this works. A rating of 9 or 10 out of 10 is a +1 from a single review. A rating of 8 or 7 gives you 0 points, and a rating of 6 or below is a -1. Pretty basic, right? Well, here's the deal. Your Net Promoter Score is determined by adding up all the scores from at least 100 customer surveys. See, those customer surveys as calculated gives you some real insights, because a positive score of 50 or above will allow you to organically grow your business, whereas a negative score will indicate that your business is going to die within 24 months. Pretty scary, but at least the NPS gives you that insight. Because really what NPS does great is it helps you quickly identify issues with your product or service so you can quickly adjust and address them. Because you're not just taking the score, you're also following up with some questions to understand why the rater chose the number they chose. By the way, for that matter, you can use the same simple scoring approach of Net Promoter Score when asking your customers about their experience with specific parts of your product or service. It doesn't have to be the whole product overall. Your ability to delight your customer and measure their satisfaction is exactly the proof that you want to look for. All of these insights and tools are designed to avoid the fourth fatal flaw. when your product idea is easily copied. See, startups often fail due to competition from established players who have the resources to replicate that startup product value, the startup's product value, and thus prevent their own customer churn before the startup is able to gain a foothold on the market. In a way, market leaders monitor how rising competitors are innovating as they leverage the learnings from those early stage products to effectively outsource their own R&D. By the way, this is also a reason why you don't want to make a big splash in your target market until you're ready to run fast during the third startup phase of sustainable growth. Too often, we see founders who really want to have a big launch party and you're just waving a flag and fighting competition. And for that matter, we'll cover this more in depth in an upcoming episode. But if you're unsure what I mean, just please reach out to us so we can help you in how to avoid this mistake, because we just hate to see founders kind of fall into drawing unnecessary attention before you're ready. All right, now that you understand what comprises your product assumption, let's look at how you'll know that you have validation for each startup phase. During the first startup phase, market validation, you will have validated the assumption related to the value your startup's product delivers through manual delivery of your product or service. Specifically, you'll measure that the value your product delivers is greater than or equal to the value promised during the sales cycle. Next, you'll measure whether your product solves your customer's problem in a profitable way, which means that your estimated cost of selling and producing your solution is less than your product selling price. Super important to make sure you can be profitable. Also, you'll need to know whether it's feasible to reduce your selling and production costs as you increase the volume of your product being sold. Last thing you want to do is get caught in a trap where your costs always outrun your revenues. Now, last thing here, you'll measure whether your customer is satisfied with your solution and wants to adopt the solution. So for B2C startups, that means you need to measure your customer satisfaction from at least 5 customers early on. And for B2B startups, you need to measure at least 3 customers. Now, there's one last point about the market validation phase I want to make sure I bring forward. Don't try to figure out tiered product packaging. In other words, if you have multiple product offerings, don't try to figure this out here. You'll leave that for the next startup phase of repeatable sales and delivery. So, as an example of a startup that figured out how to measure the difference between promised value and delivered value in the market validation phase, ValvoMax makes a high pressure valve that makes changing your car's oil easy while eliminating the mess involved. As you can see, ValvoMax documented the existing steps its customers who are a do-it-yourself car owner who maintains their own car without having to take it to a shop for the most part. They document those existing steps for that customer, what the steps the customer would take to change their car's oil, as well as all the issues that person may encounter while doing it all along the way. Now, the next thing is they document the steps that their customer would take to change their car's oil if they had bought the replace once ValvoMax high pressure valve. See, they have to obviously apply the same logic to their own product. Now, you'll notice how ValvoMax solution reduced the total number of steps that customer would have to go through down from 11 steps to 8 steps. Well, that's not enough. You'll also notice that the number of issues that their customer would encounter would be reduced from 6 to 0. And of course, very important, the time it takes to change a car's oil goes down from 59 minutes, which also includes the time spent waiting for the car engine to safely cool down, to only about 25 minutes. When looking at the relative value difference, ValvoMax is able to deliver a solution that's 84% better than its customers' existing alternatives, which means that ValvoMax is delivering on the value it promised a qualified lead, that as that person traveled the buyer's journey through its sales funnel, and more importantly, that person can measure and experience the value difference. Now, it's really important that the customer can measure the value difference as well. Just because ValvoMax did this paper exercise, if the customer doesn't recognize it, it doesn't matter. Which means ValvoMax had to prove out that the customer would recognize it, as well as include that in their product packaging to make sure the customer knew what value they were looking for. Now, we'll cover this fourth tool more in depth, as well as how to calculate the relative value your solution provides when compared to existing alternatives in an upcoming blog article at leanmastery.co. So be on the lookout there. So for now, don't worry if you're not sure how to do this just yet. It's frankly not that hard, as we've really simplified how to get the data that you need, as well as the tool to calculate the relative value and the all-important index to measure what your score means. Now, during the second startup phase, repeatable sales and delivery, you're going to build your production and delivery engine so that your team can consistently produce your product with sufficient quality and deliver your product on time. You'll know that you've completed this phase when, number one, you've achieved your product adoption rates of at least 75% of your customers. You want those product adoption rates to reflect 75% of your customers adopting your products and regularly using it to solve their problem. Number two, you validated that your volume customer targets are achieved by proving that you can achieve the cost reductions in selling and producing the product. And these are those that you came up with or you estimated during the market validation phase. Number three, you've achieved your organic growth rates as you're able to get your customers to recommend your product in sufficient numbers to generate your organic growth. How do you measure this? Well, your sample size for calculating those metrics I just discussed are 100 customers for B2C startups and 20 for B2B startups. Now, if you're selling a tiered product, which I referenced just a moment ago, then these numbers apply to each tier for validation purposes, not in aggregate, because you have to treat each tier, each product as its own tier because of the different problems you're solving. So take, for example, this Kickstarter campaign here. We can see how this team built the measurement techniques to understand if product adoption is occurring. By ensuring your product is providing real value to your customers, you'll remove the biggest risk to a sustainable business, product abandonment. Also, the advantage this startup has by using Kickstarter is that it can quickly validate the volume cost numbers and use the time to perform research into how they would reduce the cost of producing and delivering its products. There is no point in building an awesome product if you can't make a profit. Your ability to continuously improve your product while reducing costs is also an excellent method for staying well ahead of inevitable competitors. Now, of course, you must work out whether you're getting organic growth. Organic growth is a key indicator of customer satisfaction. Once again, here we can see how in this Kickstarter, the startup is using the platform's backer update capability to measure organic growth potential. You too can perform this step manually by sending an offer to an existing customer a week or two after they have started using your product. And basically what you're looking for is this offer can be something that's a perk to your new customer for them to refer a friend who purchases your product or service. They receive the perk if the friend makes the purchase. Now, during the third startup phase of sustainable growth, you'll focus on increasing the value being delivered through product improvement while also determining how to lower your production and delivery costs. You'll know that you've achieved sustainable growth when, number one, your revenue growth exceeds 25% annually. Number two, your product margins are increasing with product delivery volume. Number three, your sales conversion time is decreasing with volume. Number four, your product adoption rates are increasing with volume. And number five, your organic growth rates are increasing with volume. Which leads us to one last example. So let's explore an example of sustainable growth by examining how this occurred with an iconic company that, frankly, all of us are familiar with, but one whose path to sustainable growth was far from guaranteed. Apple. When Apple released the original iPhone on June 29, 2007, this came on the heels of an unsuccessful collaboration with Motorola on their Rocker E1, which is the very first phone to use iTunes. Initially, the original iPhone was priced at $499 for the 4GB model and $599 for the 8GB model. The original iPhone was one of the very first phones that delivered a purely touchscreen input while offering a simple 2-megapixel rear camera and dedicated apps for YouTube and iTunes. Here's the thing, based on customer feedback, Apple actually dropped the price of its 4GB model by $100 to $399 within 2 months of its release. And it kind of seems a little bit strange for a company to have a product hit on its hands and yet be so quick to discount its product. So why did Apple drop the price? Well, it quickly discovered that in a typical household, most couples had no problem whatsoever with one person making a decision on their own without consulting their spouse when purchasing an item that was less than $400. Now, if an item were to cost more than $400, then the person who was interested in buying would need to discuss that purchase with their spouse, which of course slowed down the sales process. Now you'll notice the very first release of the Apple iPhone was a single model with very few options. That was because Apple wanted to serve its core business users who often needed to be away from their desk but didn't want to lose productivity when it came to email or accessing work files. It wasn't until 2010, a full 3 years after launch, when Apple began to address other market segments such as moms, teenagers, grandpas. Every feature solved a problem that those segments had and delivered value that won additional converts. Apple's iPhone sales took off because it was disciplined and focused on its service and quality to increase product adoption. The average iPhone user spent 30% more time on their smartphone when compared to a non-smartphone user at the time that original iPhones were being launched. Now, during each subsequent release, Apple began filling in the features that the previous generation of iPhone lacked while making its iOS operating system more natural to use and welcoming third-party developers to create their own apps for sale in the App Store. Effectively speaking, the iPhone became more and more valuable to its users as they invested more and more in third-party apps unique to Apple. Now, the funny thing is that while iPhones have traditionally lagged behind competitors when it comes to the latest hardware capabilities, Apple's customers felt like they received the most cutting-edge device as Apple made it easier and easier for developers to release their own apps on an iPhone first. Think of it this way. Customers couldn't tell the difference in performance from an iPhone versus a competing device when measuring results in 1/30th or 1/20th of a second. But effectively speaking, the device's performance seemed instantaneous from a user's perspective, while providing access to an ever-growing universe of apps. All along the way, Apple garnered more and more mindshare from developers and away from Android, a competing platform, largely due to the simple single form factor of the iPhone that existed up until the release of the iPhone 6 and then 6 Plus in 2014. Even then, developers only had to update their apps for 2 screen sizes as opposed to the dozens and dozens of options for competing Android devices with different manufacturers and those manufacturer specs. So very early on, Apple understood it could provide more value to its customers by increasing the number of functions a phone could be used for in the average daily life of its customers. So the core value proposition that Apple began with, the iPhone was the one device that could replace your phone, messaging, internet browsing, music player, and camera. To continue increasing value to its customers, Apple focused on improving each of these core functionalities so they could replace more and more other devices that a person had to carry, which meant that over time, Apple became the #1 music player for the music on the go, #1 camcorder to record videos, #1 camera to take amateur shots that looked professional, #1 touch display to access information easily and quickly, #1 storage device for personal information like music, photos, messages, and work files, and #1 fingerprint and facial recognition reader to enable secure payment and data access. Apple never fell for the trap of offering the fastest processor or the most memory that other phone manufacturers touted. Instead, it provided the best tool that allowed a user to do many more things simply in one small, easy to carry device. Now, as we all know, Apple has been able to gradually increase the price for its devices as the iPhone became more and more capable of performing all kinds of complicated and robust tasks. Once the iPhone's price neared about $1,000, Apple did have a challenge on its hands. It's not immune to business reality. For nearly everyone, $1,000 is a whole heck of a lot of money, including the most ardent Apple aficionado. With the iPhone cost approaching the price of a laptop and its customers upgrading their iPhones more frequently than a computer replacement cycle, Apple had to innovate around its sales process to retain its customers and continue its growth. And that innovation in the sales process had to impact the product design process as well. So thus, Apple unveiled its iPhone Forever program, which included in the product suite Apple Care. Essentially, Apple released a device leasing offer that was neither unique or new. The difference, though, was that Apple's customers were guaranteed to receive the newest iPhone each year with a free upgrade, while also benefiting from its Apple Care warranty program that substantially reduced a buyer's risk related to incidental damage. So once again, Apple reset the market as its customers were now thinking about $50 monthly payments or even less instead of $1,000 purchases, thus solving an anchor point challenge for Apple while reducing the cost of acquiring new customers as well as customer churn. Even as Apple had increased the price of its device by nearly 3 times the original phone, or $1,000 over the 13 years since the initial device was released. By the way, as an added benefit for Apple, all of those relatively new iPhones being swapped out after 1 year provided Apple with a predictable stock of previously owned devices that it could resell into other markets that would be unable to afford a fully priced device. Yep, yet another revenue stream was born for Apple. Okay, during our next workshop, we're going to jump into the scale assumption, where we will discuss the key activities your startup will need to make more efficient and fast so that you can stay ahead of your competitors. Now, before we jump over to Shafiq to answer your questions, if you're looking to change how you grow your startup by building lean and you find these workshops helpful, please subscribe to this YouTube channel and click the notification button nearby, as well as give us a like or drop a positive comment. We love to hear from you guys. Also, if you know of other founders or product managers who could benefit from our workshops, please share this video with them so they too can build their startups lean and avoid mistakes that cost time and money. Building Lean is brought to you by the Lean Master Incubator. Unlike other incubators or accelerators that are only interested in getting you ready to pitch to investors, Lean Mastery helps you build key business functions that turn up revenues fast while helping you to avoid mistakes that cost time and money. Learn more about how you can become a Lean Mastery Incubator member at leanmastery.co. Thank you all for watching, and now over to Shafiq to get us started with answering your burning startup questions.
Hi there everyone, this is Shafiq here. Now that you know why validating your product assumption is important, we're going to pivot to answering questions submitted by founders. Steven, are you ready with our first question?
Yes, I got it right here, Shafiq. And this question comes from an entrepreneur who's been working on the startup for the past, looks like about 1.5 years. And it seems that they're stuck in the market validation phase. All right, this entrepreneur's question is, I came across your series while searching on YouTube. Okay, that's pretty cool, Shafiq. We're happy that YouTube's algorithm matched you guys up to us. And the founder writes, I wish that I had met you guys 2 years ago before I sunk my savings into producing my product. That's kind of not a good setup. I'm sitting on over 3,000 units of my product that is not selling. How can the building lean process help founders like me who have already built a large inventory of product that is not selling?
Okay, so wow, where to begin? Well, the problem here is we don't know why you're not able to sell your product. In other words, which of the fatal flaw does your product suffer from? For the purpose of my answer, I'm going to assume your product actually solves a compelling problem, and more importantly, it really does deliver 10x the value when compared to existing products. Which leaves the other two critical assumptions, channel and price. So if you've been following the series at all, a fatal flaw is one that can kill your startup because it's a fundamental physics of the market that are being violated. So if you're not solving a compelling problem, your product will not take off. Okay, and then channel and price are the other two assumptions, and of course we have product and scale. So focusing on channel and price, and my assumption is that you don't suffer from the other ones, and it may be that you just never built out a channel and that you never really tested your price. So let's kind of focus on those. So it's likely that you did not figure out how to create awareness to the customer segment you serve with your product and really don't have an efficient method for reaching them. In this case, you can use a building lean process to quickly validate the channel assumption manually by going back and interviewing customers to build the messaging and manually testing that message. If your manual tests are successful, then you'll try and automate your manual channel into a self-serve model. So that's kind of like where Steven talks about going from market validation, repeated sales, and delivery. That's a 1-2 step. So manual first and then self-serve. Now, let's assume you're successful building a channel for your product, meaning you can, people who suffer from the problem you're solving with your product, you can easily make them aware of it. That's what a channel does, right? So they come to you. Then the next challenge you have is how to take them through the buyer's journey efficiently so you can get a decision to purchase within some reasonable number of tries. In other words, let's assume your manual channel can deliver 30 qualified leads in 30 days. Then you know your sales funnel is working when within 5 days of receiving a qualified lead, you can manually convert 1 out of 5 of them into paying customers. And if you're successful selling manually, you'll be able to validate the price. The next step would be then automate the sales into a self-serve model, right? Like maybe getting on Amazon and so on. But you don't want to get on Amazon without knowing that you have a product that you can take the buyer through the journey. You can message, activate the customer, get them to learn about the product, and then purchase it from you. So you can use now, but since you're sitting on inventory, you can use your inventory to work out the repeated sales and delivery model. Once you have a self-serve lead engine and sales engine, then you can focus on product adoption, which might mean you probably have to fix your product packaging. One of the key things about product adoption is, as a user receives the product, you're not there to explain it, can they open that product and figure out how to use it on their own? Does your packaging help them figure that out fast, right? Otherwise, what are they going to do? They're going to either return it or they're going to throw it on the shelf and never use it. Either case, you lose because you won't get any organic growth. So you wasted a lot of time selling to that person and it doesn't give you a lift further down the line. So that's how the building lean process can help your awesome product, assuming it is an awesome product. Steven, would you like to add anything to my answer?
Yeah, just a bit. I think the important thing that you're emphasizing here is that someone should take away, what they should take away from the Building Lean series is that this is all about managing risk. Sometimes we kind of, as entrepreneurs, we forget that. We imagine being an entrepreneur is just something risk is inherent on. And in fact, experienced entrepreneurs understand that the important aspect of what they're doing in their job is managing risk. So in the case of this entrepreneur, while his 3,000 unit inventory is that's a natural worry. It's not the first time we've come across it. And the reality is that 3,000 unit inventory exists. And what that means is that for this founder, they need to manage the risk on the next actions they need to take related to how they recover their business, which is exactly what you've been describing, Shafiq. So in effect, I'd say the last thing that a founder would want to do is to further or deepen their risk by spending more money on unproven assumptions, especially when it relates to how to attract their customers or generate demand. So being able to take the steps that you just described would help them purposefully, in a lean fashion, work through the business process they need to build, and yet not take inordinate amounts of risk of, say, hiring a sales team or paying somebody to do marketing for them. They'll be able to prove that out themselves and then whittle down the inventory. And then once they have everything worked out, then they can really accelerate sales and pull back that and sell down that inventory they have. Okay, Shafiq. We have our next question right here. And this one comes from a local founder in Houston who's, this is cool. They're really confident about their product's potential based on early feedback that he's received. So that's cool. They've been talking to early potential customers. Once again, though, this founder is in the market validation phase. And his question is, I know my product is really awesome compared to my competitors, but I'm not sure how to measure and communicate the difference between my solution and the alternatives in the market. As in, the person writes, he's struggling with how to communicate how much better his is compared to the competition. So he's asking us, Shafiq, do we have any recommendations that would help him figure this out?
That's a terrific question. So many companies are unable to get their product adopted because they fail to communicate the value correctly. So working out how you can measure the difference and communicate it is really, really important. I can't emphasize that enough. Steven, can you throw up the slides we have that to demonstrate how some companies measure the difference and then communicate it back? Yeah, okay, cool. So remember, you have to measure how your product or service is solving one or more of the 4 problem dimensions that your customer is currently experiencing. So in this first example, Groupon is demonstrating how its service saves money for its customer before the sale, during the sales cycle. On the left side, this saving is reflected both in the price reduction as well as the prominently highlighted percentage savings. On the right, this savings is reflected in a deeper price reduction relative to the original price reduction, along with the countdown clock when this second price reduction expires. So in the next example comes from HB. And if you're from Texas like me, then you know that HEB promises everyday low prices. HEB reinforces this by clearly stating how much you saved when grocery shopping with them by printing the amount you saved in large bold letters on your receipt. And to make sure you don't overlook the value being delivered, HEB trains its clerks to circle. They use their little finger because the receipt allows them to write by just running their finger over it. Circle the savings to its so it stands out relative to everything else printed on the receipt. So now let's look at a time-saving example. Okay, so on this next one, while you may take for granted how quickly Google provides you millions of search results today, the value your service provides was exceptional relative to other slow search engines when Google first launched. The fact that Google could generate millions of results within a fraction of a second reflected the promised value that Google was the fastest and most comprehensive search engine. Google still displays these two key pieces of information to reinforce that it's the best at providing all the world's information. Now, speaking of the promise of quality being delivered, look no further than a sizzling steak. Steven, you're going to like this one. Sizzling steak being delivered to your table at your favorite local steakhouse. How can the user tell if the steak consists of really good quality meat? The answer, pioneered by the Taste of Texas Steakhouse in Houston, turns out to be placing a recognizable sign on top of the steak that reads Certified Angus. Now, when I say they pioneered it, it's how I came to know of it. It doesn't mean that nobody else did in the world, so please don't send me hate mail. And then, if you kind of pay attention to the sign, so what do you think the sign is telling a diner before they cut into the steak for the first time? That's right, they're about to enjoy a high quality cut of beef. Even more so, the table has been set for this customer to expect to enjoy their meal before they take their first bite of that certified Angus beef steak. By conveying the high quality of the product value being delivered, even with a simple, recognizable label, top steakhouses are able to charge a premium to cover the cost of their expensive raw materials. So to answer your question, you need to figure out what dimension of the problem your product solves when compared to the alternative, measure the difference, and then figure out how to communicate that difference. Ideally, you communicate the difference when they just finish using your solution to solve their problem, like we saw in the Google and HEB and Texas Steakhouse example. Steven, you got anything to add to that one?
Yeah, actually, first off, I'm glad you brought up the steak example, although it makes me a little hungry hearing that one, seeing the visuals on that. But I do feel like it's redemption from the last time we did Q&A and you tried to explain to me that magic is not real. So I know you're on the right track trying to fix your faults, Shafiq. So I'm glad you bring it. You're speaking to my heart here with steak. Now, you covered a lot of ground and provide a lot of great examples. Matter of fact, actually, one of my favorites is the HEB one because as you described, the checkers were trained to take the receipt and physically scratch on the receipt, and it made the when they handed it to the shopper's like, what are you marking on my receipt? So it drew that attention in. So I think that's really great. Matter of fact, I think actually if I was watching this Q&A, I'd probably scroll back and re-watch your answers to make sure I didn't miss anything in your examples and try to figure out which one of those examples best applied to the product or service I was selling, particularly related to the value proposition. So, and also I think the key takeaway is that that for a founder, your customer has to be able to recognize the value your product delivers. It can't be just something in your own head. It has to be evident that the person can self-recognize. They can even perhaps tell their friends about it in a way that's very natural. So, all right, last question here, Shafiq. And this one comes from a startup that's actually in the second startup phase, focused on repeatable sales and delivery. This founder is concerned about automating their customer delivery process. And let's see, so she writes, we provide services to small business owners. We have some customers that love our services, but they've noticed that their customer churn rate has increased to over 40% in the last 2 quarters alone. The founder writes, how can she and her team go about reducing their customer churn issues?
Wow. So customer churn is like one of those sticky topics, and there could be a myriad of reasons why you're having customer churn. So let's kind of, you already have, you provide a service and you already have customers that like you. I think that's the way I heard that in the question. So since this founder provides a service and they have unsustainable customer churn problem, I'm going to assume that they have delivery issues. In this case, this founder needs to isolate the cause of the customer churn. Because if you kind of think about it, the fastest method for discovering the problem is to perform a lost customer analysis. You should contact the customers that dropped your service and perform a customer discovery to understand why they dropped the service. Now, if you're not sure how to do this and how to get their cooperation, message us, and either Steven and I will take the time to help you out with that process. But doing a lost customer analysis, win-loss analysis, is really important, and you can do that when you've had a customer and then they churn out for you. You're going to learn more out of that process than anything else. But let's assume that we don't know what the answer is. I can't tell, but let me kind of enumerate really quickly through two common reasons we see for customer churn, specifically around services. So the first one is the customer drops the service because the vendor fails to deliver on the value promised during the sales cycle. So you sold a service and you might have one or more value props. And you need to understand why, the reason they bought from you to begin with. And that's where a win-loss analysis is really important, understanding what helped you win the business. And then if you lose the business, what caused you to lose it? Because that helps you figure out where you have gaps in your product and why customers are buying from you, both of which are really important in accelerating sales. But to fix the problem of delivery, and this problem, you'll need to understand the gap between what's being promised during the sales cycle versus what you're able to deliver. So if your customers are buying from you because you're promising something, but you really don't have your act together and being able to deliver it yet, you're going to need to adjust and figure out in your sales cycle how to identify those customers who buy on that promise and like delay them till you can fill the gap. Like, put them in the backlog or something, or keep track of them and nurture them, but don't make the sale so you don't have that churn problem until you can fix that gap. And if you can't fix that gap, then stop promising that value prop, because you're not going to be able to deliver it. You can't be out of sync of what you're promising. Now, the second common reason is inconsistent service delivery. And I'm assuming maybe that's what's going on here, is that you have an inconsistent service delivery because your service is highly dependent on staff. And then you have different skill levels of staff that are providing the service. So some customers love service because you have some really good employees. And the high churn rate is primarily driven by the poorly trained employees that are unable to repeatedly provide the service your customers have come to expect or expect as part of the sales cycle. So in this case, the fix is to observe the top performers and to identify the critical skills necessary to successfully deliver the service. Next, you would train up low performers to see if training helps them perform any better. Why go through the steps of training low performers? That's because upskilling employees provides you with a huge benefit. Because it's a huge benefit because you don't have to rely on A players only. A players are very expensive, and if you can train up B players, then you've got a distinct advantage. And more importantly, now you can repeatedly measure to make sure your employees are able to deliver that. Now, there are lots of other reasons you can have customer churn, but these are the ones that come to mind around services. And I would pay attention to one or the other possibility, and feel free to reach out to us. We'll see if we can help you through and figure out quickly why they're churning by doing a customer loss analysis.
So, yeah. I guess just to kind of follow up on the founder is in the repeatable sales and delivery phase. How would this help them as they're getting ready to automate their next steps?
Well, if they don't have good adoption going on, basically their whole business is at stake, because if they're having customer churn, at some point or another, assuming my iteration 2 was accurate, your employees that are now well trained are going to end up providing the service at some point or another, because the A player went on vacation and so on, to your customer. So your churn is not going to get any better. In other words, if you have high churn now, it won't get better unless you pinpoint what the cause is, right? So it could either be because you're promising something incorrectly or so on. So if you don't get that high adoption rates, then you're just not ready for scale. because it takes a lot of energy to generate the lead and then close that lead into a business and then get them started only to have them go away. And especially when you're not collecting the dollars up front and it's a month-to-month service, that churn can be very expensive because it may take you 3-4 months to break even, which means every churn customer is actually costing you a lot more money than you're making ever off of them. So that's just not a tenable proposition. So they're not ready for scale until they conquer this, Stephen.
Okay, this is perfect, Shafiq. If you guys are enjoying Shafiq's Pearls of Wisdom, I think this is, we're going to have more, so make sure you send in your own questions. I think the important takeaway here is that growing startups just can't ignore the satisfying their customers, even if you have a bunch of customers who love your product, because otherwise, if you don't get a handle on that, you're going to feel like you've ended up on a treadmill, just running in place as you're spending just as much energy adding new customers as you have to basically replace the ones that churn out. And Shafiq and I have used the that win-loss customer analysis, that follow-up conversation, and it's remarkable how receptive people are to those follow-up conversations. They're willing to help you because you're doing it sincerely and you're making it clear up front that you're not trying to sell them anything. Okay. As a reminder, everyone, in addition to offering our regular incubator membership, we're opening up a special cohort for startups who are interested in running a crowdfunding campaign. So if you have ever tried to run a Kickstarter campaign and failed, or even Indiegogo, or you've had a successful campaign but failed to continue selling your product post Kickstarter campaign, or you're thinking about running a brand new Kickstarter campaign, especially this fall or spring, apply now. Actually, you have to turn the applications in by August 15th, but it's important that go ahead and get your applications in now to join our Lean Mastery Incubator's special Kickstarter cohort. The reason why I want you to apply now is that spots are limited and we're using a rolling admissions process, which means that the quicker you apply, the better chance you'll have to gain one of the remaining coveted incubator spots for this cohort. And we're seeing some really cool companies come through. This Kickstarter cohort begins on September 1st, 2020. To learn more about the Lean Mastery Incubator Kickstarter cohort and apply, you can go to leanmastery.co/Kickstarter. Guys, don't miss out on this opportunity to have your Kickstarter campaign fully prepared to be successfully funded, so get your applications in today. Thank you all for watching, and we look forward to helping you be successful in pursuing your startup dreams by building lean.